last night I capped off a movie marathon by watching Mr. Nobody, which is a movie I've seen before. It stars Jared Leto and it also has Diane Kruger and Sarah Polley in it. And it's a great movie with a very complex, very well executed plot, but there are lots of various Mr. Nobodies to follow. And the difficulty is that some of them have very little variation, at least physically, so it is a little bit difficult to track at times, and I think that's potentially one of the reasons why this movie didn't do so well in cinemas, because it is complex. I intended to take a couple of notes just to kind of keep track of the various Nemos, and this is what ended up happening. You can see there's copious amounts of notes. And that happened because the more notes I took and the more I tracked the life pathways and the life choices of Nemo, the more interested in this plot I got. It's a really interesting movie. It's 2.5 hours long, but it's really one of those movies that benefits from multiple viewings. This movie is about choices, and it's about how seemingly tiny events in the world or in someone's life can have a huge butterfly effect on the outcome of your life and the events of your life, and how each choice can take you down a completely different path, and that no choice is the wrong choice, but that making no choice at all allows anything to be possible still. So it's a very interesting movie. I think the way it has been put together is to allow for multiple different interpretations of this plot and of this storyline. And I think that's done deliberately to allow the viewer the choice, and any choice is the right choice. And it's just such an interesting way to put together a film. It is potentially a little bit complex though for like mass consumption in a cinema type viewing situation, which is why, like I said, I don't think that it did that well in the cinemas, but it is a very interesting movie. I saw an interview with Jared Leto about this movie when he was filming it a while ago, and he said he plays 12 different versions of Nemo. I counted 10 last night, but it was after midnight, so I probably missed some. But basically from this point on, this video is going to be spoiler heavy, so you can either keep watching because it's a movie that is not going to be ruined by you knowing some spoilers. In fact, it might help you follow it a little bit more. But if you really like unraveling a complex plot on your own and really like just having your mind exploded a little bit by a movie, then stop watching now. So it is hard to know where to start with this movie and how to start explaining it, because it's so multifaceted and everything kind of links back together. And essentially what happens is that Nemo is a child, like many, who you see them as children before they're born, and before they're born they know everything. They know how their life will be. They know how everything will pan out. And then once they're preparing to be born, the angels of oblivion come and take them, and then you choose a mother or father and family to go to, and the angels of oblivion touch the children on the lips, and that basically wipes their memory of everything that's going to happen in their life. And it marks the child with that kind of little groove that you've got above your lip. And basically the angels of oblivion forgot to do that to Nemo, so Nemo still knows the outcome. I love the concept of the butterfly effect, and it is very richly involved in this movie. And quite early on they make a point of, the importance of each moment. Why were you born on the day you were born and not any other day? Nemo's father slipped over on a leaf, and that was how he met his mother. But had he have stepped in a different place, he wouldn't have stepped on that leaf, he wouldn't have fallen over, and they wouldn't have met on the street. So it is a really very interesting movie from that perspective, and you've got to be prepared for a lot of butterfly effect in this movie. But essentially, because the angels of oblivion didn't touch Nemo on the lips, he is able to predict some things that happen, like, for example, an accident that his father has. He predicts it happening, but is unable to stop it from happening. And Nemo talks about this as remembering the future, which frustrates his mother because she says, you know, you can't remember the future. But the concept of time is played within this movie, the concept of the universe and time expanding and contracting, and how some things, once you do them, you can never take them back. Like, for example, once you mix sauce into something, you can't unmix it. You can never have two separate entities again. Smoke never goes back into the cigarette, it only comes out of. And there's a moment in the early phases of the movie where the young 9-year-old Nemo is standing in front of like a table covered in cakes and sweets and things, and he's got some money to buy one with, but he doesn't know which one to choose. And the quote is, "We cannot go back. That's why it's so hard to choose. You have to make the right choice. As long as you don't choose, everything remains possible." And so young Nemo basically in that moment realizes that if he doesn't make a choice, everything is still possible, and he walks away from the cake table. And as he walks away, we're introduced to the 3 women who will be part of potentially one of his lives, and that's Anna, Jean, and Elise. And they are young girls, same age, sitting on a park bench saying hi to him as he walks past, having walked away from the cake stand. As he walks past these girls, you get flashes of his wedding to each of these 3 women, but he continues to walk past them because at this point no choice has been made, so anything remains possible. So as I said before, Nemo is able to predict certain events in the future because he says that he's remembering the future. So he predicts his father's accident, which is essentially him getting distracted because he was eating something and the manufacturer had left an eggshell in it, and he's pulling it out of his mouth going, "Oh, that's disgusting." And he leaves the handbrake off his car, and his car rolls down the hill and rolls over a mother who was pushing a pram across the street. And Nemo had had the vision that this was about to happen and had raced out onto the street to try and stop it from happening. But because he's remembering the future, so to speak, he can't stop it. He's just aware that it's going to happen. And then that marks the beginning of the demise of his parents' relationship, which then progresses even further when Nemo comes home from school and sees his mother kind of walking off into the woods, and he follows her and finds her sort of having an affair with Anna's father. This then takes us to the moment that the whole film is based around, which is Nemo's parents have separated, Nemo's mother is leaving, they're at the train station, and 9-year-old Nemo is asked to choose between his parents. His mother asks him if he wants to go with her or if he wants to stay with his father. And really, it's an impossible choice for a 9-year-old to make, and he can't choose. So he kind of just stands there, and you get this visual image of train tracks and them dividing off and how many potential options there are. And so his mother gets on the train. The use of the train tracks and how train tracks divide to really make a very, very powerful image of the different choices and the different outcomes of each choice, and how many paths there are available as a result of each choice is really beautiful. And it's used a few times throughout the movie. And they then use one of the many versions of Nemo, who I just call Scientist Nemo. And Scientist Nemo then talks about, because he's filming a TV show, he talks about time expanding and contracting. And so from this point onwards, you get to see all the various lives of Nemo play out dependent on which decision he makes and what happens, and the butterfly effect on his life. And this is where I think it gets a little bit confusing, although having taken notes, it made much more sense. But you then meet 118-year-old Nemo, who is the last mortal person. And the 118-year-old Nemo is obviously the last Nemo to die in each of those life choices. And then at the point at which he dies, the universe expands and contracts and time changes. And essentially Nemo then is taken back to being a 9-year-old, and you realize that all of these various Nemo lives that you see play out are happening in the imagination of this child. This child is seeing the outcome of each choice and seeing his life. And I mean, he's faced with the impossible choice of choosing between his mother and his father and knowing all the outcomes. And because this movie is about understanding that sometimes no choice allows anything to be possible, Nemo then makes no choice and runs off away from both of his parents, and somehow as a result of that ends up with his true life, his true love, which is Anna. There's a very important point that's made along the way by 118-year-old Nemo, that no choice is the wrong choice, every choice is the right choice, and every outcome is the right outcome. And it's just a very powerful movie about choices and the butterfly effect. So now I'm going to take you through I think the various Nemos so that you can understand the various Nemos, and then I'll take you through the outcomes of mum or dad and the women involved in his life. It's very hard to explain how this is going to work out. So by my count, there were like 10, maybe 11 Nemos, depending on if you count 9-year-old Nemo. I remember Jared Leto saying he played 12 Nemos. There's a lot of Nemos. So there's 118-year-old Nemo, and Leto does an awesome job of playing him, and you can also see that this is where the Joker laugh came from. There's the scientist TV presenter Nemo, and he is Anna's husband, and he dies in a car crash, that his car crashes into water and he drowns. There's the photocopying executive Nemo, who is Elise's husband, and there's 2 various lives that he has, well, maybe 3, so there's a lot of Nemos. There's pool cleaner Nemo, there is weird British Nemo, and he marries Jean, and his demise is basically that he ends up pretending to be someone else and gets shot because it's the case of mistaken identity. Then there is widower Nemo, who has a burn on his face and he dies in Mars. And then there is Nemo, who has a burn on his face, who is a widower, who is a scientist. There is Mars Nemo, who is a widower, and he dies in a meteor strike. There's Kid Nemo, who dies as a result of injuries sustained on a motorbike. And there is weird plaid shirt Nemo, who is kind of Nemo in a dream state, limbo land. But there are a lot of Nemos, and I mean, a lot of, well, they all die, I guess. And I mean, when I first watched this movie, I was kind of like, well, what's the point of making a choice? Because any choice this kid makes, he's going to die prematurely in 98% of the cases. And I mean, I guess that's kind of the point, is that he's seeing the life path and the result of the life on each of these choices. Okay, so now we're done with the 100 Nemos. So then Nemo is faced with the option of going with his mum or staying with his dad. And there are kind of 2 things that happen here. So in one option, he decides to go with his mum, and he sprints after his mother as the train is pulling away, and he makes it. He makes it and he gets on the train with his mum. Nemo making it on the train with his mother then leads very heavily into his storyline with Anna, and Nemo's mother ending up with Anna's father. There is also the other option where Nemo runs after his mother. His father screams out his name as he's running. Nemo turns and looks over his shoulder, and kind of doing that slows him down enough, and his shoelace breaks because of the butterfly effect of a manufacturer deciding to use cheaper shoelaces that they know are going to snap. And so Nemo doesn't make it onto the train, and he ends up living his life with his father. Living with his father leans heavily in towards the Elise storyline. So basically, when Nemo lives with his father becomes disabled by some means, and Nemo becomes his carer. Like, he bathes him, he shaves him, he takes care of him, and the frustrated 15-year-old Nemo basically rides his motorbike around screaming at night to let go of all the things he's feeling, and he goes to a dance party, and that's where the Elise Jean storyline starts to happen. So there are a couple of main points in which you get Nemo in his life when he's 9 years old, and his parents' relationship is exploding, and he has to make this choice. When he's 15, when you start seeing some more about the repercussions of whatever choice he makes, when he's 34, and then when he's 118. So if we start with Elise. So Elise is the blonde wife, so that's played by Sarah Polley. She meets, again, 15-year-old Nemo at this dance party, and she's there with her boyfriend. They have some sort of like fight, and you see flickers of what's to come with Elise, and she has this huge emotional breakdown on the floor and then pretends like it's nothing, encourages Nemo to follow her out of the dance, and he does, and then she's crying on the streets and he's comforting her. This is where then the choices of Nemo start to divide. So as part of the conversation that they have, in order to have something to say, Nemo starts talking about Mars. Elise makes him promise that if she ever dies, he will take her ashes to Mars and scatter them, and he agrees and promises that he will. Nemo then goes to kiss her, and there are multiple outcomes. So, I mean, in all of them, he actually kisses her. In one outcome, she rejects him, and in another outcome, he stops her before she can fully reject him. So when he stops her before she can fully reject him and walk away, he tells her that he loves her, and then that life choice pathway leads to him marrying Elise. This is where this storyline gets a little bit complicated, and I might not have followed it perfectly, but did my best. Nemo marries Elise, and there are now a couple of options that happen after he marries Elise. So one is that they very happily driving themselves off from the wedding, and they get stuck in some traffic behind an oil tanker, and the oil tanker explodes, which kills Elise. So then there is one Nemo who basically becomes a little creepy and has a shrine to his wife at home and is kind of a scientist, and he has a burn on his face from the accident. There is also, and I'm not sure if that Nemo and this Nemo are the same, there is also scientist TV presenter Nemo with a burn on his face, who is still the widower, who goes to a funeral of one of his co-workers who died in a car crash where the car crashed into the water and his colleague died, and that colleague is turns out to be Anna's husband, and so that death kind of mirrors one that Nemo has in an alternate life. And yeah, so that's kind of that side of Nemo, who's a widower, who has a burn, who either kind of gets a bit creepy in his own house and takes photos of things dying a lot, or becomes a TV presenter and retracks and finds Anna and freaks her out a bit at the funeral. Or then that Nemo then goes to Mars to spread her ashes on Mars and dies as a result of the travels. So then we go back to Nemo marrying Elise. So the alternate side of that is that then they have children and Elise becomes really severely depressed. She has manic episodes. She basically has some undisclosed mental illness, and you watch how their family kind of works around that situation. And I don't want to explain that whole thing because it takes up quite a large chunk of the movie. There are moments where he's driving in his car and he drives beside Anna but doesn't realize that it's her. He continues to try and help Elise function and be happy, and tries to support her as much as he can. And he quits his job as I think he's a photocopying executive at this point, and he is spending more time with her, and he washes his car a lot. And in one life she comments about, you know, what's the deal with the car? Why do you always spend time with the car when I'm at home alone inside by myself and you're out there with the car? So Nemo goes and sets a car on fire, and then they seem to be happy after that, but like a split second later, I don't know if she hasn't made the comment about the car or he's just kind of shrugged it off, but you see her leaving in the middle of the night, walking past the perfectly intact car, and she leaves him because she says she's still in love with her ex-boyfriend that she broke up with at the party when she was 15. I'm pretty sure I didn't track that name, that's too hard. And she becomes a hairdresser who's obsessing over a photograph of this man that she says she's in love with. And that's kind of the Elise storyline. So then if you go back to when Elise and Nemo were 15 and he kisses her, and then she either rejects him or she doesn't reject him. If he allows her to reject him, then we go down another pathway. One pathway sees Nemo write Elise a letter expressing his feelings for her, and he goes to her house to give her the letter. Now there are two options here. In one option, Nemo sees Elise with the ex-boyfriend reunited on the doorstep, and he leaves without giving her the letter and rides his motorbike off screaming again to get out his pain and his frustration, and he has a motorbike accident and smacks his head against a tree and essentially after a long time dies. And then there's the alternate option where he is a little bit later, like a few seconds later, and he doesn't notice the ex-boyfriend leaving and he gives Elise the letter. Then I can't remember because it was 1 a.m, but I'm pretty sure Nemo gives her the letter. She rejects him and says, look, I'm still in love with my ex-boyfriend, and Nemo is crushed, and so basically he goes, well, that's it, you know, I'm gonna marry the next girl I dance with, because they're going to another dance that night. And he tells his father, I'm getting married. His father's like, oh, who's the lucky girl? And he's like, you don't get it, mate. I'm just going to marry the next girl that I dance with. And the next girl that he dances with is Jean. So basically, because Elise rejected Nemo, 15-year-old Nemo goes to a dance, hooks up with Jean, who genuinely has feelings for Nemo. And Nemo's kind of like looking at Elise hooking up with her boyfriend. Yeah, it's not great, but let's face it, it happens with 15-year-olds. But Nemo commits himself to that life, that relationship, but he's not really present in that life. He's not really present in that world. And it kind of comes to a climax when he wakes up poolside having, I guess, tried to drown himself, and Jean tried to save him. And he's kind of confused about who these kids are and who this family is, and he doesn't really love her, and he seems very confused about the whole world because there's some crossover. So as Elise's husband with kids, he's going to take the kids to school, and the postman puts some things in their letterbox, and he opens them up, and it's a photo of Nemo with a family with Jean, and he doesn't really understand, and everything's moving backwards because of the time concept. Anyway, so back to Jean. So he is poolside trying to recover, and he goes inside and they're talking, and he's kind of, you know, blocking her out, and he sees on the news there's been an explosion on the bridge and like in the traffic, and that is the reflection of his life, where he would have married Elise and been in the car when there was the explosion on the bridge, just as the resulting reflection of widower Nemo sees Anna grieving over her husband who's died in the car crash that is submerged in the lake. It's very complicated. I hope you're following. Anyway, so Nemo basically is not really super involved with the family of Jean. It's not really a big storyline. He basically kind of gets up and wanders off and goes on his own little adventure. He's a weird British Nemo at this point, which I don't understand why he needs to be weird British Nemo, but whatever. And he goes to a hotel, and having pretended to be somebody else at the airport, and you know how they hold up the sign that says, you know, Jane Smith, and he said, yeah, I'm that person, and they took him to the hotel, and it's a case of mistaken identity. People come looking for that person, and they shoot him in the bathtub, and then Jean, you know, has to identify his body. Okay, so I think I've covered all of that. Now we go to if he goes with his mother, which is the Anna Heavy storyline. So Nemo chooses to go with his mother, and they set up a new life together, and Nemo is at school, and he and Anna cross paths and recognize each other, and they go to like a lake to have a school event, and they go swimming, and Nemo can't swim, and there are two options here. So Anna comes over and says, come on, you want to have a swim with my friends? And he is either rude to her and sort of says, I don't swim with idiots, or he says, look, I can't swim, and so she covers for him and says, look, I'm not going to go swimming, I've got my period, when her friends ask, come on, let's go. So then you see the life pathways of what happens as a result of what Nemo says to Anna. So in the pathway where Nemo insults Anna, he basically bumps into Anna at the train station years later when they're 34, and she's there with her kids, and it's kind of like, oh, hey, how are you? Okay, bye. And that's kind of that. So in the pathway where Nemo admits he can't swim and Anna stays with him on the beach, basically they fall in love. And unfortunately for them, their parents also still are in love, and they get married, and they talk a lot about Nemo and Anna being brother and sister, despite the fact that Anna is like, hey, he's not my brother. And you kind of see them sneaking around the house to be together, while once again Nemo's mother's relationship slowly explodes, and Nemo does not have a good relationship with his mother at all. She's very dismissive of him, very rude to him, and he likewise, there's not a lot of love lost there. When Nemo's mother and Anna's father are splitting up, Nemo and Anna have a conversation about, we'll find our way back to each other. Go to the lighthouse every Sunday and I will get there when I can. Wait for me. Like, this is forever. The rest of his life is about going to the lighthouse every Sunday and waiting for Anna there. And he becomes a pool cleaner. Basically, there is this train station, and he keeps walking through the train station as a result of traveling to this lighthouse every Sunday. And there is a homeless girl there, and he gives her money. And then one time he's coming back and she's not there, and he notices like a pile of boxes where she normally is, and he lifts up the boxes and she's dead underneath there. I think she's probably OD'd. And so because he has given her money before, because he has noticed this woman before, he's not one of the many that just walks past this dead body. And so he then obviously calls the paramedics, and he's still there when the paramedics take the body away. And because he is still there, because he made the choice to give her some coins before, the butterfly effect of that is that he is reunited with Anna at the train station and they get back together. But because Anna has become so used to living alone and refusing to love anyone, because she says she renounces all possible lives for one only with you, but she's become so used to living by herself and having conversations with Nemo in her head that she's not quite ready to, jump straight back in, and she just needs a little bit of time. So she writes down her phone number for him on a piece of paper, and she says, call me in 2 days and then we'll meet at the lighthouse. And she walks away, and basically then it's kind of a everything is nothing and nothing is everything situation, and it's the importance of the place you stand, the importance of a raindrop, and basically that something as seemingly insignificant as a raindrop can change your life, because a raindrop falls down and hits the piece of paper that she wrote her phone number on, and the phone number, because it was written in ink, just is gone, and he can't call her, and he has no way of getting in contact with Anna again, so he loses her again. And basically what they then show is that storm was the butterfly effect of somebody else not going to work and boiling an egg, and that putting steam into the atmosphere, which changes, like, it's basically that concept of a butterfly can flap its wings in Saigon and create a tornado somewhere else. And so it's just like, it's really beautiful that something as insignificant as a raindrop can change your life and be so significant, even though it's one of many. And it's just a really beautiful and very sad moment. So then, because Nemo is left without options, he just continually goes to the lighthouse and waits and waits and waits for Anna, and has this kind of vision of seeing her in his dreams, and marks that spot on the ground, but presumably never comes, because then you go back to 118-year-old Nemo, who is basically being interviewed by someone, and the guy is going, look, I don't understand, like, how are all these lives possible? You can't have married someone but not married them, but died but not be dead, but what the hell is going on? So then 118-year-old Nemo says, look, Mr. Nobody is a man who doesn't exist, which makes Nemo's name really relevant, because Nemo means nobody and his surname is Nobody, so his name is Nobody Nobody. And then 118-year-old Nemo explains that they are imagined in the mind of a 9-year-old boy with an impossible choice, and everything disintegrates because 9-year-old Nemo realizes that these are the outcomes of all of his choices, and it's an impossible choice to make. So faced with an impossible choice of choosing between his mother and his father, and of knowing the outcomes of all possibilities as a result of each choice, Nemo is still unable to choose. So he chooses not to choose, and he runs away from his parents. There's a nice line in this area of the movie where it says, when the only viable move is not to move. So as 9-year-old Nemo bolts away from both of his parents, he, I guess, essentially becomes homeless, and he floats a leaf up into the atmosphere. And then you go back to Nemo lying on the bench and outside the lighthouse, where he's marked a circle on the ground where he thought he saw Anna, and she walks into that circle. And so at the end of the movie, he's reunited with Anna because she is essentially his true love and his true life, and so somehow they wind up back together. So it's a very interesting movie. It's a little bit difficult to explain because there are so many threads, and I've probably missed a few because there are so many Nemos. But it's a really interesting movie about choice and about how there's no wrong life, there's no right life, there's no right choice, and about how you end up where you need to be, and about the butterfly effect and how seemingly insignificant things you do in your life could affect other people's lives. And it's you know, like the significance of a raindrop. It's a really beautiful movie. It's very complicated. If you're going to watch it, you need to be concentrating, and it's 2.5 hours long, so it's a pretty long movie, but it's well worth a watch, especially if you like movies with more complex plots that have been really well thought out. It's a great movie, so I would definitely recommend Mr. Nobody if you are looking for something a little bit different.